Hello, Internet. Welcome to the Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse. This is not, as you might suppose, a podcast about surviving the zombie apocalypse. At that point, all hope is lost, and you should run into the horde of zombies. No, this is a podcast in which a variety of subjects will be examined using philosophy in the hopes of gaining greater insight and perspective. This knowledge, or this podcast won't solve all your problems, but it will make you think. Your mileage may vary. Normies not allowed. Okay, well, I guess I've said that enough. Said the intro enough to have it basically memorized. Even though I haven't done a podcast for 6 months, I think. So this was an impromptu podcast. I wasn't planning on. I didn't wake up today thinking, "Oh, I'm going to do a podcast." But as I'm sure you've heard, the Supreme Court finally released its decision regarding, well, a while back we got, like several months back, we got a leak, which was indicating that the court might overturn, Roe versus Wade, and they did finally. They the decision, I think it was like is it a 6-4 decision? I didn't do. I should have probably done research or composed notes or something. This was just entirely on the fly. But yeah, I think it was a 6-4 decision. Originally, I guess the case was regarding a clinic in Mississippi, which I want to say. Let me check this while I'm have it up. I think it was like there was a ban after a certain amount of time at this clinic. In Mississippi. Let's see. I'm just looking at the Washington Post right here. I should have looked this up earlier. Yeah. Oh well, I can't find it right now. But oh, here we go. Banning abortion after 15 weeks. That was this. This is the Politico. This was an article. Can Mississippi's last abortion clinic survive? Published on May 26, 2021. Long before the funky restaurant and shops began to turn Fondrine into Jackson's trendiest district, the neighborhood's landmark institution was a bright pink building surrounded by concrete and iron walls, 8 feet tall at its peak. That is Mississippi's last abortion clinic. Last week, the scene was more or less normal. The women seeking care would slowly turn into the parking lot, careful not to hit the protesters camped at the entrance, who held signs preaching eternal damnation. Volunteers in shadow-patterned vests ushered the women inside. Pop music blared from speakers to drown out the protesters, many of whom bring their own amplifiers. The U.S. Supreme Court announced it would renew the case known as Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is the formal name of the Pink House. The case concerns Mississippi's 2008 ban on all abortions after 15 weeks of gestation. The law was blocked on appeal as an unconstitutional violation of Roe v. Wade, the landmark decision that afforded women the right to an abortion prior to viability, which is considered 24 weeks. the possibility that the newly conservative Supreme Court would take up the case that could challenge a standard that has stood since 1973, possibly replacing one landmark case for another, was cause for celebration among the state's mostly male and mostly white lawmakers who have vowed to make Mississippi, in the words of a former governor, the safest place in America for an unborn child. So, that's the background of what happened today. There was a justice. I'm trying to forget his name now. There was a justice who did ultimately side with the court on that issue, like the specific issue of the 15-week the ban of abortion after 15 weeks in the state of Mississippi. And then he said they should not have, the court should not have gone farther and ruled on Roe v. Wade itself. That was, I think, let's see, I think that was Justice Breyer. This, as you can tell, I'm not a very professional person. But yeah, I think this was Justice Breyer. Okay, this is BuzzFeed News. All you anti-social justice warriors will love that I'm looking up a BuzzFeed article. Let's see. The conservative majority of the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade on Friday, overruling decades of precedent that protect abortion rights in the U.S. In a searing dissent, the court's three liberal justices, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan, decreed what they said was a cavalier approach to overturning women's rights. Well, now I don't remember. But there was a justice who ultimately sided with the majority on the Mississippi case. And I think was dissenting on Roe v. Wade being overturned. So that's why this happened. Yeah, I'll be honest. I've been very tuned out of the news, so. But regardless, you don't get to get your news from me. I did want to talk about it though, because it is an issue that I've thought a lot about. And it is an issue. It is a philosophical issue that has actual real world implications. And although it does, I think it might be an interestingly, a particularly American concern. I don't know if people in Europe have the exact same hang up in this department for whatever reason. But it been an issue in the States for quite a long time. Okay, here, hold on though. Here's another political article. Supreme Court has voted to overturn abortion rights, draft opinion shows. Okay, this is actually another old article. This is written in May, on May 3rd of this year. The person familiar with the court's deliberation said that 4 of the other Republican-appointed justices have... Hold on. Now I'm like have to figure out who dissented, who was for the Mississippi ban, but not for an overall federal ban. That's what I'm trying to figure out here. But let's see. NBC, Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, doing away with half century of precedent. The court ruled 6-3 to uphold. Did I say 6-4 earlier? The court ruled 6-3 to uphold a Mississippi abortion ban being challenged in the case. And 5-4 to overturn Roe. In the majority opinion, Justice Samuel Alito wrote that the court's decision in Roe sparked a national controversy that has embittered our political culture for half a century. Legal scholars say the decision to overrule Wade is one of the few times the Supreme Court has ever invalidated an earlier decision that declared a constitutional right, and the only time it took away a right that has considerable public support. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled, Alito wrote in the opinion, which was backed by Justice Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, also appointed by Trump, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one on which the defenders of Roe and Casey now chiefly rely, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. It is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives, he wrote, calling the original Roe decision egregiously wrong and deeply damaging. People are making a big deal about his choice of phrasing there. In a concurring opinion, Kavanaugh noted that states retain the power to limit or grant the right to an abortion. Chief Justice John Roberts joined the other conservative justices in the decision to uphold the Mississippi law, but he urged in a concurring opinion against going further. Surely we should adhere closely to principles of judicial restraint here, where the broader path the court chooses entails repudiating a constitutional right we have not only previously recognized, but also expressly reaffirmed, applying the doctrine of state decisis. Robert wrote. So it was John Roberts, excuse me, not Breyer. Breyer is one of the liberal justices. So again, clearly you don't get your news from me, and perhaps those little fumbles at the beginning of this podcast will make you forever question any political judgments I have for coming on the air so unprepared and ignorant of what's going on around me. And then, in a furious dissent, liberal justices Stephen Breyer, Elena Kagan, and Sonia Sotomayor said the court, quote, reverses course today for one reason and one reason only, because the composition of this court has changed. Whatever the exact scope of the coming laws, one result of today's decision is certain: the curtailment of women's rights and of their status as free and equal citizens. The justices added, with sorrow for this court, but more for the many millions of American women who have today lost a fundamental constitutional protection. We dissent, they concluded. Okay. Well, I was trying to give you some context. Again, I should have prepared more. I apologize. But the I guess to further elaborate on my lack of political judgment, or knowledge, I was holding on to the hope. Um, I was thinking, and I turned out to be wrong, but I was thinking that, well, it surely they wouldn't, um, you know, detonate this nuclear bomb, to quote I think a legal correspondent from NPR. Um, the nuclear bomb part. The rest are my words, but surely they wouldn't, detonate this nuclear bomb. Like surely there'll be like one conservative judge who will side with the liberals. Maybe not even because he, is crazy about abortion as a procedure, but because it's precedent, and often many um, people and legal, or many jurists and judges and their legal decisions appeal to precedent. Um, and maybe as a way of squashing the issue, not making it, not adding fuel to the flame of the culture wars. Um, I had I was really hoping against hope that that would help, that would prevent Roe v. Wade from being completely overturned. Someone in my comment section says, historians are saying they have never seen Democrats this upset since Republicans outlawed slavery in the 1800s. I'll just let that stand as a statement. I don't have a response to that. But where was I? I lost my train of thought. It'll come to me. I was talking about. Oh yeah, I was hoping against hope that the decision would be very different. I was wrong. I misjudged. And this is the reality. I mean, this is the world we live in now. My thoughts are over the place now, but it'll all come together. This is the world we live in now. It's kind of frustrating because, you know, uh, anti-LGBT legislation there is anti-LGBT legislation in Texas. We literally had a failed coup attempt, an insurrection. Don't let anyone ever tell you it wasn't a coup, or an attempted coup, excuse me. It was a failed coup, a pathetic coup, a poor excuse for a coup, but a coup attempt nonetheless, based on people who thought Trump had lost the election. Now we have the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Times are, history just keeps moving forward, right? It just keeps going on. I think we forget about that. We think of history as something, that's is taught. It's about those people that were, dead, that died hundreds of years ago, and that's history. But you don't have to think of your own time as history. But history is, in the popular imagination, that's sort of like how we compartmentalize it. But history is always moving forward. History is like a continuous locomotive that never stops. Historical events, world historical events, never stop. And you also, nothing is ever guaranteed in this life. You have to fight for what you believe in. because you never know, which way the pendulum's going to swing at any given time. So I understand everyone's frustration, anger, sadness, fear. I understand all of that. Hopefully we can, use this as a time of, collective organization, of campaigning, of activism, putting our voice out there, getting more people to care about the issues we care about, and fighting for our values. The person in the comment section said, they overturned Roe v. Wade because there's nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government has the power to enforce abortion laws. It's not codified in the Constitution. Well, I guess I'll get into my thoughts on on Roe v. Wade and what all that right now, since you bring it up, and since that's what the whole podcast is supposed to be about. I think the issue with, I was talking about this with some people on Discord earlier. The issue with a very strict or literalist or traditionalist view of the Constitution is that it was written so long ago. It was written over 200 years ago by people who lived in very different material conditions, who were faced with very different issues, and who were a very specific kind of people, right? They were the white property owning classes, middle and upper classes in the British colonies, angry with Britain for perceived or actual slights, and they wanted to run the show. So, and you can say it's admirable that the Constitution has lasted as long as it has. There's definitely wisdom to be gained from, the example the founding fathers sat down or put forth. I'm not here to demonize, anybody per se, but I am here to say, we have to have, I think, a more open interpretation of our legal system, because times change, our values change, and we cannot just trap ourselves in that 18th century, 19th century mentality and be like, this is exactly what, these people in this time period wanted, when they probably weren't even thinking about, I mean, we know they were not thinking about things like abortion rights in, the late 18th century, because the issue didn't come up. They weren't thinking about all kinds of things. And there were issues that they could have solved, in that moment when they didn't, like slavery. Thomas Paine wanted the U.S. to ban slavery at its founding and say, put this beast to rest, to bed, get rid of it. Don't let this infect. I mean, he really, he sort of, had this idea of like, oh, kind of the U.S. was like a new beginning and New Jerusalem or whatever. So it's like, yeah, at the founding of this new, this momentous moment in human history that was for freedom and equality and whatnot, in his mind, we should outlaw slavery, really lean into our principles of human emancipation, and set a new example for the world. Turn a new leaf. And we didn't, right? I mean, they were, I'm sure the founding fathers were worried that the slave states wouldn't ratify the Constitution if there was something in there about, about outlawing slavery, and I think wasn't it in I think in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, who was a slave owner, originally wrote more vehemently and explicitly against slavery. But those passages or those sentences were excised because, again, they want this country has always been about compromise and consensus, and that would those sentences would have enraged the slave owning or would have enraged the slave states. So all of this is to say that the country was founded in a very different cultural, political, economic landscape, and I don't think we can use their frame of reference for a legitimate or pragmatic or for a legal system that is both legitimate and pragmatic. We have to have a 21st century legal system, a legal system that works for the 21st century and deals with the problems we face and the values we have within the 21st century. So that's my response to that. It is true, I'm sure, that what is included in the right to privacy is up for debate. It is, there is no, I don't think, firm line. There might be obvious, like, extreme cases, but I don't think there's necessarily a firm line between what is and is not included under the right to privacy. Again, Roe v. Wade was an interpretation of the Constitution, and almost all, legal precedents or almost all court rulings are a certain interpretation of the Constitution. You couldn't, and law is all about interpretation, right? You could never have a law, or you could never have a legal system that was not based on interpretation. So there's that. As for now, of course, it should be added, this does not outlaw abortion entirely, right? This is kicking the issue to the states. This is saying this is a states' rights issue. And there was, in fact, I was listening to a podcast by, what was her name? It was a New York Times contributor, or a very famous New York Times contributor. I don't remember off the top of my head, but she had on a legal scholar who was pro-choice but did not like Roe v. Wade because of this issue. He was saying Barry Wise. Barry Wise. Pretty sure it was her. She had on a legal scholar on her podcast. I don't remember his name either. I'm trying to find it, but this guy, he's a very well-known legal scholar, I think. And he was saying that, we have to recognize that we live in a country with varying political, basically what I took away from his argument, which is maybe oversimplifying it, I don't know, but he was like, young kids these days can't recognize there can be legitimate differences of opinion. Here we go. The Yale, this was honestly with Barry Wise, the Yale law professor who was anti-Roe but pro-choice. She interviewed Akir Reed Amar, who is the Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale University. But he was arguing that Roe v. Wade was a bad decision, and that to make sure the decision is more democratic, is more bottom-up approach rather than top-down approach, and to ensure that we live in a country where the opposition opinion is taken more into account, that abortion should be a states' rights issue, and that more people should get involved at the local level to, if they want their laws to be different. So this was his Professor Amar's opinion. And I'm not a legal scholar, as I'm sure you have already guessed. But I think my issue with this being a states' rights, my issue with it being a states' rights issue is, we haven't had a good history of leaving up rights to the states. Again, I was mentioning slavery earlier, and I'm sure people would be, mad crazy for me making these historical allusions, but I think they're relevant. Slavery used to be a states issue. Used to be, we want a bottom up approach of like, well, if some people want slaves, they should have slaves. Some people don't want slaves, they don't have to have slaves. And so segregation, that used to be a states' rights issue. Or things like, interracial marriage, or gay marriage. All these used to be we want to be inclusive. We want to, consider everyone's opinions. And so those states that want, gay marriage, interracial marriage, slavery, whatever, can have those, and those that don't, won't. And as nice as that might sound to some people, what you're saying then is rights exist, that rights are more a state's issue than a federal issue. Now, I know, our system is kind of weird in that, federal law, some laws are based at the state level, some are on the federal level, but overall, the federal level is, what trumps state level. So if federal law disagrees with state law, the federal government has the right to, strike down laws contrary to it and enforce, penalties, or enforce prohibitions on things and whatnot. But I think that when it comes to rights, I'm not going to get into a big philosophical conversation about the nature of rights or how we decide on rights. That'd be like a book length issue. I've been reading Kant regarding that, though, so maybe I could glean some insight from Kant. But nonetheless, I think if we're gonna care at all about civil rights, legal rights, then we cannot vote on those things. Okay? We cannot vote on rights. We have to decide as a society what rights we're going to have, and ensure that everyone across the board in this country, as an American citizen, or even those who are visiting, and whatnot. Well, no, we're not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about immigration and visitors and whatnot. That's going to complicate things. We want to ensure that every American citizen has the same rights and and the same responsibilities for that matter. Because if we don't, people will be voting your rights away or voting somebody's rights away. That's what people like to do. They vote away the rights of people they don't like. So I think, perhaps for those of us who are like more inclined towards, democratic theory and wanting, believing in like the power of the people, sovereignty of the, people or whatever, we have to say that certain principles have to be codified into law, regardless of what, this, that, or the other person think. I mean, I take, we can just take gay marriage. Okay. That was an issue that, wasn't solved until very recently, actually. Wasn't it 2015, 2016? When was gay marriage legalized? 2015. That's what I thought. Yeah, let's just take gay marriage as an easy example. I don't think, or if we're going to say that gay people have the right to marry, then they have to have the right to marry. I really need to start talking about abortion. I'm already 40 minutes in. Maybe this is going to be like a 2-hour podcast or something. If we're going to make the claim or the argument that gay people have the right to marry, then we can't pick and choose and be like Californian gay people or gay people, haphazardly born or living in California, they have the right to marry. But gay people in Kentucky, well, no, you don't have the right to marry because, well, you're in a conservative state and California's a liberal state. So you got to move to a liberal state to get married because that's just the way it is. And we got to accept different opinions. We got to accept the will of the people. If the people don't want gay marriage, then gay marriage isn't going to happen. Now, in fact, it's actually, even with states, even with bringing the issue down to the states, abortion or any issue for that matter, it's not even necessarily more democratic that way, because then it's just a small handful of representatives deciding, oh yeah, this shouldn't be legal just because we say so, because we have this ideology that we've swallowed, and that's how it's going to be because we say so, and we have all the power and influence, and so in fact, I don't even necessarily think it is more democratic to bring it down to the states level. But if it is, even if I entertain that thought, then that's a limit on democracy, and we have to say no. We have to say that can't be part of the democratic process because we can't have people, willy-nilly, pulling the rug up from under you and saying this group of people no longer has legal protection because we say so. We have to recognize as a country, okay, these are the rights, people have, and have it apply to all the states. Rights have to be top down, or you have to take a top down approach, I think, to rights. Because now it has happened again. It is women in certain states no longer have that right. to an abortion. It's just gone for them. Like I think I've told you before, I live in Kentucky. Okay, women in the state no longer have the right to an abortion. That's it. There's no question, no ifs, ands, or buts. They can move to, or they can move to or go to another state where it is legal. Because I'm hoping the lawmakers can't go so far as to say you can't travel elsewhere to get an abortion. Someone else I was talking to in Discord said that would be an infringement on the freedom of movement, and or someone then a third person was saying, well, those laws might get passed, but they would be struck down. Hopefully they're right, because that was my concern, is if it's a states' rights issue, what prevents the states from saying, if you leave the state's jurisdiction and get an abortion, and abortion, on our law books is murder, you're still committing murder, just in a different state, and we will persecute you because you are subject to the laws of, say, Kentucky. Hopefully, again, that they're right about that, and that wouldn't that even conservative justices wouldn't go that far. But not only does that privilege end up privileging some people over others based on purely geographical accidents, or unrelated decisions on your great grandfather's part or something. I don't know. It can be very hard. It could be very hard for many women, particularly many women who don't come from many poor women, to find the time to get off work, to find the people to take care of their children, to pay for healthcare, a medical procedure out of state where they might not have health insurance. There's all these issues that are going to disproportionately affect, poor people, people of color, disenfranchised groups that are already, disenfranchised, or in a disadvantaged spot. That will greatly impact them, and many people might be trapped in their state. Many people not technically, that they'll be trapped by circumstance. They'll be trapped by their lack of material resources. But I'm sure wealthy women, or even maybe upper middle class women, they would have an easier time. It could still be challenging for them, but they would have a much easier time, flying off to California to get that abortion that they wanted. So then it becomes, well, if you have the money and resources to go to this other state halfway across the country, to terminate your pregnancy, great. If you don't, too bad for you. So I'm trying to think of where to take the conversation, or the where to go in my thought process from here. Let me start unpacking maybe the issue itself. So I do come from a family that is mostly pro-choice, and I haven't really strayed much from that part of my upbringing. There was a brief time when I had doubts about the pro-choice opinions of my family. In fact, in a think one of the first podcasts I did, I said I was neither pro-choice nor pro-life. And I think I immediately regretted saying that. I was like, oh, that's not quite what I meant to say. But I guess for a while I was like questioning a lot of like the liberal assumptions of my family and my upbringing. And so I thought, well, maybe, this issue is more complicated than I thought. Because, so, I mean, for example, I do hear quite a few people on the left argue that, a fetus is not a life. And that therefore you're not taking a life when and the argument goes like the life starts at birth or something like that. And, it shouldn't have legal rights, civil rights, protections and whatnot until, it's actually come into the world. I'm not convinced by the idea that a fetus is not a life. I think that's perfectly obvious. And I don't think we need to be spending too much time quibbling over the definition of the word life. Because, and this might not be the best argument I could make under the circumstance, because I think it confuses people too much. But I think we don't view life as, or we don't think of life as this sacred thing a good deal of the time. I think the pro-life argument is sort of, inherently based on the idea that life is this sacred thing that we have to preserve, at least in most cases. And I just don't think that's the case. I don't think most people, if you really pin them on this issue, have that attitude. I know, I mean, many people can hold some contradictions and paradoxes in their views and opinions. So I'm not saying it's, simple, or people's view of life is simple. It's not. But, we send people off to war to die for their country and call it self-defense. This is actually less true now in the 21st century, but the death penalty has a long history. It stretches back to probably for as long as we know, probably for as long, for the entirety of recorded history, there's been record of the death penalty. And many countries, or there are countries now that are even, or physician-assisted suicide is another issue. Many people are saying, well, if you have a terminal illness and you want to go, you think it's your time to go, then you should have the legal right to do that. That's also a controversial issue in my country, in the United States. And then what else? I mean, if a baby, if a fetus is, or a baby is born and it's incredibly deformed, it might not be the doctors might not say, save it. There are just so many examples. Controversial, yes. Like debated to no end. Yes, you can debate these things till the cows come home. But at the end of the day, we recognize that life is Sometimes life must come to an end. Sometimes you can't preserve life. Sometimes life is not this sacred thing that should go unaltered. Sometimes there are other values that trump our value of life in this or that scenario. I didn't mention animal consumption of animals and animal products. Now, if you ask the vegans and vegetarians, they think the rest of us are all wrong on this, but most of us eat meat. I do, or other and or animal products. Again, I do. That's taking a life. That's saying, this chicken or this cow or this pig or whatever, its life is my desire to eat have a chicken sandwich at McDonald's. I do like chicken sandwiches at McDonald's, I'll be honest, because I have poor taste. And so I'm saying when I buy that chicken sandwich from McDonald's, I am saying that my desire for a chicken sandwich trumps that chicken's right to live. Now, I didn't, create the factory farming system. I didn't design the system, but I am contributing to it when I eat meat. Those, if you pay your taxes, you're contributing to the military industrial complex and to, wars overseas and military endeavors underseas that kill other people. No one's hands are clean here, right? Or as leftists like to say, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. And so I don't think we can have a simple attitude towards, the value of life, and and it's not easy to say when life should be preserved, when it should not be preserved. I don't understand why abortion is where many people draw the line. I don't understand why, after all the other things I've listed, that abortion is where we're like, no, we can't take that life. We'll take lives in all these other scenarios, but we can't take life in this scenario. Someone like, well, when thinking about like the issue of abortion, you think about someone like Peter Singer, right? The Australian philosopher who, most people I think would take his views to be very extreme. But I think he would say something to the effect of like, look, an adult chimpanzee is more of a person, quote unquote, than like, a 9-week-old fetus, because it's already an established, a being in the world. It probably already has like, preferences and obviously it doesn't. Its mental life is not as rich as a person's. It doesn't have this biographical element to its being, but it can suffer. It would suffer more and it would lose more if you killed it, as opposed to when you terminate that. As opposed to when you kill that 9-week-old fetus. People I know, pro-lifers, they like to bring up like, when the heartbeat starts or, when the brain starts developing. But still, it's like it has less of a mind or an understanding or an ability to feel than that chimpanzee. And that's true, I think. I can't know. I'm not a fetus or a chimpanzee, but I think it's reasonable to intuit such things. And of course, Peter Singer would probably go even farther than I would. Or at least he's willing to advocate for opinions publicly that I don't know if if I'm willing to, because he would say, I was actually reading an article not too long ago. It was a profile of him in The Guardian. And actually, if I can, I would like to pull that up and read a couple passages. Here it is. The most dangerous man in the world. And I want to read the passages on, if I can find it here. Passages on the idea, his views on infanticide. Because he said, so he talks about this idea of like personhood, like how do we define personhood? I'll just read this bit. He says, or the article says, but for Singer, not all persons are human, and some humans are definitely not persons. And this isn't actually the example I just used. An adult chimpanzee can exhibit more self-consciousness, more personhood than a newborn human infant. Under Singer's worldview, if you came across a newborn infant who had no family and a mature chimp and could only save one of them, you might actually be under a more moral obligation to save the chimp. Killing them, infants, therefore, this is a quote, I think, from Singer, cannot be equated with killing normal human beings or any other self-conscious beings. No infant, disabled or not, has a strong claim to life as being capable of seeing themselves as distinct entities existing over time, he states in Practical Ethics. At one stage, the ever-practical Singer proposed a postnatal 28-day qualification period during which infants, non-persons at that stage, could be killed. The idea, this is the author now, or of the article, the idea sounds preposterous, but are Singer's theories so far-fetched? In Britain, since the 1967 Abortion Act, we have effectively operated a dual standard. Human fetuses are denied rights and the protection of law. And yet, in premature births, we strive to our utmost to preserve human life. Logically, there is no real difference between the potentially disposable human material in the womb and the sacred, inviolable, that's a hard word to say, inviolable human rights that are conferred upon the baby at birth. Singer merely takes this one step farther and argues that newborns are not persons and do not therefore deserve the full status of legal protection. I do bring this up because, again, that's an extreme position. That's even more extreme than probably most pro-choice advocates would be comfortable with. And of course, disabilities advocates are also very upset with him because he would argue certain, in his, perfect world, babies born with certain disabilities need not be, their lives need not be preserved. In fact, my professor told of some, I couldn't find the video, but some story of, I think it was a disability rights activist. She might have also been a philosopher who cornered him in his office, or cornered him outside his office and was like, in your ideal world or something, I wouldn't exist. I don't know the exact conversation, but it was something to that effect. Like, your philosophy does not allow for my existence, my personhood. And Singer was, Singer. And so he was like, yes, you're right. He accepted the charge. Again, this seems extreme. This would make many people uncomfortable. It's why this article calls Singer the most dangerous man. But my whole point in this conversation on abortion is for us to recognize the inconsistencies with which we value a life. We inherited from the Enlightenment a desire to fight for human rights. The idea that, at first it was it came from God, right? The deists sort of argued that God because of our ability, or because he instilled in us our ability to say reason, he instilled in us like a dignity that cannot be taken away from us. And people might have might have lost the belief in God more and more, but many people have still retained this idea. Like, yeah, no, if you're human, you have certain worth, innate worth, and value, and dignity that cannot be taken away from you. Full stop. So we've inherited this idea from the Enlightenment and other places. And this was the foundation of human rights. But as much of a fan as I am of human rights, I think we have to acknowledge that if we're going to be scrupulously logical about it, then we have to open our minds to the possibility that in practice we don't believe that, and there are times when certain sacrifices have to be made, certain difficult decisions have to be made, and that's just part of our lot in life. There's nothing we can do about that. We just have to accept, a harsh truth about the world. Humans aren't necessarily, the special thing with special privileges. We, certain societies give people certain privileges or don't for all kinds of reasons. And it's, it's artificial. It's a social construct. And that's fine. All that's fine. There's no issues there. I have no existential, dread when I think about the fact that my rights are a social construct, or are privileges that are given to me, on from on high, or from the legal system, in which I happen to accidentally have been born under. Had I been born in a different country or in a different time period, I would have different privileges. And we have to decide. Again, I do think the abortion issue is relatively simple, but I am recognizing the difficulties involved in all these in these conversations. We have to think about what we value, because rights are ultimately about our value system. If you believe, for example, that someone's voting rights should be taken away, if they committed a double homicide and they're going to be in prison for how many years? I mean, they're a felon now. So they're right. Some people would say, well, you've, become an antisocial being, basically, and your right to vote, your right to participate in the voting process should be taken from you. You no longer have a voice in that regard. That is a value judgment based on intuitions, right? There are no, there's no way to prove in like a mathematical or scientific sense. There's no way to prove that person that right should be taken away from that person in that scenario. You're saying that this person's crime is so bad that privilege should be taken away. You're assigning value to that person and to that action. And that's sounds trite, but that's how all rights work. It is subjective judgments, and when you make those subjective judgments, or you have these intuitions, and then you can reason from those intuitions, to broader, um, questions about political institutions and economic policy and whatnot. But you start from unprovable intuitions. And that's why, like, an issue like abortion, there are no, like, facts on the ground, so to speak. There really aren't any facts that I think can demonstrate to you that you should be pro-life or you should be pro-choice. Um, it is a value judgment that you have to decide for yourself. It is, kind of it can be anxiety provoking having to make value judgments or having to construct a value system or adopt a value system, because, this is why, for example, someone like Sam Harris, or, well, actually, let me rephrase it like this. The thing that Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson agree on, is that we have to believe in moral realism. We have to believe that there are, right or wrong, answers to moral questions. There are, that you can make, that you can have mistaken moral views. They both agree on that. And they both agree on that because, that is a comfortable place to be. It is comforting, to think that your values or your moral judgments rest on an objective foundation. There was a time when I even considered myself a moral realist. Because there do seem to be things that are just so reprehensible that they can't not be, that they can't not be wrong. When you think about something like genocide, I don't know. I'm getting all the buzzwords. That's no reason. No wonder none of my videos are monetized. I say all these buzzwords. You can't think about all the various genocides throughout history and not, like, just shudder and get a horrible feeling in the pit of your stomach, just to be like, oh, that's so bad that it just you can't say it's not wrong. But well, you might not be able to say it's not wrong. You can't say it's objectively wrong. You can't say there's any way of demonstrating, logically or empirically, that it is wrong, because wrongness is a concept that humans made up, and then we interpret, other people's actions using that concept, or as well as concepts of good or right or just or unjust. Yeah, they're all just concepts in our head. Again, in my opinion, that's fine. they don't have to be anymore. They don't have to be anything but concepts. But if they're just concepts, then I think we have to acknowledge some degree of moral skepticism. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say moral nihilism, but we have to at least acknowledge that I don't think moral claims can be epistemological claims. And that, I keep using this word proof, but that proof of our moral claims is a fool's errand. It's impossible. It just won't. It can't happen. So that leaves you with the uncomfortable position of choosing whatever values make the most sense to you. And, I do recommend, using your critical thinking skills to the greatest capacity. I do recommend thinking deeply about what you want your values to be, examining other value systems, examining what other thinkers, philosophers have said on, various topics, thinking about what your friends and family say about various topics, getting, as much information as you can about various value systems. And your value systems might change. Will grow over time. They can change. It's not something that has to be static. It's not. You don't have to make an opinion on something or make a value judgment and then stick to that value judgment for the rest of your existence. So, there's room for rationality. It's not to say that just because, something is subjective doesn't mean it has to be entirely arbitrary what you believe and why. And on an issue like abortion, I have I make the judgment that my concern for the women, the women's health and life, trumps concerns I have for the fetus. I think it is an immense cost to be pregnant. Both in terms of time, in terms of money. It can be a very unpleasant experience, physically and mentally. I don't think we need to force. I don't think we should be forcing pregnancies onto women. And I think most women, probably wouldn't. Women don't get abortions willy-nilly. Women don't. 5 months in the pregnancy, they're just bored one day. They don't have enough to do, and they're like, "I'm bored. I'm gonna get an abortion. I want to make my life more interesting." There's reasons. There's personal, financial. Well, I guess financial reasons would be personal reasons, but there's a thought process. There's a long story behind. I'm sure behind every abortion. I'm sure there's a long story. Whether it be, rape, incest. She's too young to raise a child. What have you. I'm sure I'm forgetting many possible reasons. Maybe turns out the fetus is unhealthy, deformed in some way. Maybe they just don't want the child. Maybe they just don't want to give birth and raise that child. So I'm willing to sort of rest my case with the woman is getting an abortion for a reason. There's a reason she's getting that abortion, and I don't think it is my place or anybody's place really to say, you're pregnant. You have to go through with that pregnancy. It is your moral obligation, or you are legally mandated to go through that pregnancy. That is a judgment that we make for you, and you follow our judgment because you are, a citizen of the United States of America. I just don't buy that. I don't think why should it be anyone else's place to make that decision? Who can stand up and say, yeah, I, know what's better for that woman, or I know, what should be valued, and I can tell her that she has to go through that pregnancy. I know that. I'm certain. That's just fanaticism. That's just pure ideology. That's just that is you imposing, your subjective value judgments on another person. Now, it could be said that, like, all society is about imposing subjective value judgments on people, right? If I were, I'm not, but if I were a monarchist, let's say, if I were, a staunch defender of the divine right of kings, I'm in America. There are no kings. There isn't even an aristocracy, right? So, we assume in this country that democracy is the best form of government. And so, but I want, I want to be ruled by a king, or I want to be in a society where the king is the head of the state. All right, okay, but the U.S. is imposing its democratic values on me. I don't want them, but I was born in this country, so therefore, well, these values are being imposed on me. I don't get a king. Too bad for me, right? So, we have to acknowledge that, I guess, society is based on imposing subjective values on others. But I think something like abortion is one of those value judgments that need not be imposed on by law on all the people in that country that can get pregnant. Because this affects trans men as well. By the way, this isn't just a cis woman issue. This is a pre-op trans man issue. Because trans men have also had a history of being discriminated in the healthcare system. So, just throwing that out there. But if you don't, this is a cliche phrase that I'm sure people have heard a million times, but if you don't like abortion, don't get one. The law is not saying there's no such thing as mandatory abortions. There's nobody saying, we should force this group of people to get an abortion. We should force that group of people to get an abortion. You must get an abortion. It is your moral obligation, duty, imperative, whatever, to get an abortion. That is nobody would say that. Nobody believes that. I don't think it's ever been uttered. Well, actually, I think the Nazis did believe in forced sterilization, so they might have believed in. Okay, well, I guess there might be one example in history. The Nazi Party probably would have believed in mandatory abortions for the groups of people they thought were subhuman. But in America, in 2022, nobody is saying anything of the sort. And by not guaranteeing a federal right to abortion, you are thereby imposing the values of the pro-life community on people in the states without without already existing laws in the books that say abortion is legal here. So that it's not a one side. It's a one-sided issue at that point. It's a nobody is getting. Nobody's really being imposed upon when abortion is legal at the federal level. Now, you might not agree with it. You might say, I would never get an abortion. You might say, I think abortion is immoral. You might say someone, it only if you get an abortion, you are a bad person. You might say those things. You might believe those things sincerely. It might be one of your most deeply rooted beliefs. But, there are a lot of things that other people do that you could consider wrong, bad, immoral, abhorrent, whatever. But if you are not personally being harmed or, really even affected by it, by whatever it is the person's doing, this is where my libertarian side kicks in. Not a fan of libertarians, generally. No offense to any libertarians watching. But, I'm willing to say, on quite a few issues, like, if it doesn't affect you, don't worry about it. Let the person live their life. Let the person make their decisions as a rational adult. And the case is the case is dismissed. The issue's dropped. If you don't like alcohol, don't drink alcohol. No, you shouldn't. I mean, we tried this and it failed, but even if we hadn't, you shouldn't say, I don't like alcohol and it should be illegal for anyone to drink because I think it's wrong. Same with tobacco. Same with marijuana, which isn't legal yet at the federal level. there are so many examples of things that you might not like about, there's, of actions that you might not like, but it doesn't personally affect you or harm you, and you're not being forced to do it. No one's being forced to drink alcohol, smoke weed, smoke tobacco, or get an abortion. And on top of that, there is on the books, in theory, a separation of church and state in this country. It's not true for a lot of countries, and we did it less for Enlightenment philosophical reasons, and more just that various states had established religions, and we wouldn't have ratified the Constitution. Again, the consensus building country. We wouldn't have ratified the Constitution if Calvinism were the law of the land, if Anglicanism were the law of the land, what have you. We had to, the unpragmatic grounds, the founding fathers had to be like, okay, no religion. We're not going to say anything about religion. It's going to be a personal matter. Leave it at that. Now, not all pro-lifers, of course, are religious. The late Christopher Hitchens. I would I don't know. It's hard to say if he was pro-life or pro-choice, because, of course, with someone like Hitchens, it was nearly impossible to ever put him in a box. But he expressed, at least pro-life. He expressed personal pro-life views. I'm under the impression he did not want Roe v. Wade overturned, and he did not want abortion to be illegal. But he expressed distaste in the procedure. He expressed, disagreement with the idea that it wasn't a life, it wasn't an unborn child. And he thought, whenever possible, abortion should be avoided. That is, I think, the most rational position if you're going to be against abortion. Is you can say, I don't like it, but it should be legal. I don't like it, but it should be legal. It's not. Well, I brought up separation of church and state, because I was going to say, I think most pro-lifers, again, I mentioned Hitch, and there are others, most pro-lifers are religious. And you shouldn't be imposing your religious values in law at, in the government. Government should not prefer any religion or the other, or any religious position over the other. So in other words, I'm dismissing out of hand, like, the soul question. If someone's like, well, we shouldn't have an abortion abortion should not be legal because of souls are infused in you and the embryo meets the egg. Like, that's not even, I don't even consider that a conversation that you have at the adult table. I am saying, go play at the kiddie table, go sit at the kiddie table, discuss your made up soul, discuss your nonsensical fairy tales. Let the adults have the real conversation about the legal system. Sorry if that sounds cruel or flippant, but of course, the pro-lifers that aren't religious are even a little harder to argue with, because you can't necessarily dismiss them out of hand, based on your metaphysical or religious opinions. And And some of them genuinely believe that abortion is murder. And most people would say murder is wrong because it's intended killing of another person. And so therefore abortion is wrong. Murder is not legal. If abortion is murder, then abortion is not legal. And if I were to give them the time of day, I suppose it would be a right to life issue. They might say, well, all your other rights are based on your right to life. So we have to, the women have to go through these pregnancies because if they don't, then you and I don't have a right to life. Essentially, that would be my attempt to steel man, and a secular argument against abortion. Of course, I think the elephant in the room is what is right to life exactly, and do we have it? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure because we don't have generally a right to food, a right to shelter, a right to water. Now, some countries, some social democratic countries with a welfare state generally don't leave people out, don't leave people high and dry. And even in the U.S., which has a pretty pitiful welfare state, generally you can get food stamps, you can get government subsidized housing. That there are ways, even in a country like the States, to ensure that if you are poverty stricken and in a horrible situation, or in a horrible, your finances are in shambles, you're homeless, you're starving, there are things you can do. So generally we don't leave people, just to die in the street. But at the same time, like in the States, we have a homeless person problem, and it's not a problem of resources. I mean, it would be a problem of allocating resources, right? Because there are enough homes in this, or houses, or apartments in this country to house everybody. It's just a fact. We have plenty. Yeah. It's a problem of allocating resources. And the cost of, what would it take to house everybody and all that stuff. So in practice, I don't really think, people do have a right to life. Healthcare. I mean, in this country, healthcare is not a right. Again, we have Medicaid. If you're really poor, you can get some healthcare through the government. And then if you're, we have Medicare. If you're, I think 65 or older, I think it's 65. You can get help with your healthcare through the government. But we don't have a right to healthcare. We don't have a right to housing, to shelter. Don't have a right to food. Don't have a right to employment. Now, you need money to survive in this world. You need money. The world runs on money. If you don't have money, then you're stuck. You're going to be homeless. You're going to be starving. Your life is going to be miserable if you don't have money. So we don't have a right to employment either. Many people. This is where well, I was gonna say something irrelevant. There's all these, rights that we don't have, that I think you would need to believe in, at least to some extent, if you believe in the right to life. If you believe in the right to life, then I think some positive. People would say it's a negative right. No one has the right to end your life because they're robbing you of all the opportunities of life. Okay, then I think you would have positive rights to things that you need to live your life. Because if you're if you don't have certain things, then what good is your right to life? If you don't have food, shelter, employment, or means of some kind, this is why someone in a desert island, or they might be totally free, but if they don't have anything, they're up the creek without a paddle. If they don't have anything, what the quality of their life is probably going to be abysmal. And so I had another thought and I lost it. I was going to say, yeah. Oh, actually, I remember what I was going to say. Even Walter Block, who's a well-known libertarian, ANCAP type. I was watching earlier a video, which is just some clips spliced together of him talking about his position on abortion, which is evictionism. Now, evictionism he describes as a principled compromise between property rights and the non-aggression principle. Property rights, self-explanatory. Non-aggression principle means you don't have the right to aggress, or the rights do not cover aggression towards other people. So things like the reason these someone like that would say taxation is theft is because the government is aggressing against their citizens. They're saying, if you don't pay these taxes, we're going to put more fines on you. And if you don't pay those and if you continue to not pay your taxes, you're going to jail. Force will be used against you. So, the whole non-aggression principle goes down to you shouldn't use force against somebody unduly. Unless you're protecting your property rights or something. Unless they're violating your rights, you can't use force against them. You can't coerce them to do anything or to say anything. And they shouldn't be able to coerce you for anything. Even he says there's no right to life. And the reason this is a principled compromise in his view is because right now, I guess he would just want limited abortion. So just have, cut it off at I don't know how many weeks, 14, 15 or something. It's okay, no abortions after this period because it's viable. And because it's viable, you shouldn't. Then having an abortion and killing the fetus is an act of aggression. So if it's viable, the fetus is viable. Save the fetus. If it's an earlier term abortion, it's not viable. Well, that's when your property rights, are important. The property rights to bodily autonomy. So yeah, he's saying you have the right to evict the fetus, but not to kill the fetus. He's just saying at this point, with our medical technology, some fetuses will ultimately die, but that preserves bodily autonomy. And then he says, in the future, when we have better medical technology, the libertarian position will be pro-life because, maybe in his view, hopefully, any or almost any fetus could be preserved and eventually become a fully grown, healthy adult. But even Walter Block, the good old libertarian philosopher, says there's no right to life. So that is my, I guess, refutation or my attempt to refute that line of reasoning. I mean, I haven't had a great record with talking to people who think abortion is murder, because I think it's where language kind of breaks down. Like I don't quite know what to say to someone in that scenario. Because if they truly think abortion is murder and then I am pro-murder, then I'm a bad person in their, world, in their philosophy or worldview, and there's not much I can say or do to disprove that. Our values are just so diametrically opposed that maybe silence is better. But I'm putting a whole podcast out here because I do think it's an important issue, and I am willing to engage with the issue. It's very important to me, on principled and pragmatic grounds. Now I don't, I don't have a uterus, shocker. So, I used to think this is a silly argument, but I don't think it's a silly argument. Maybe I would amend it if anything, but I do think, again, women and then trans pre-op or trans men who never go through surgery, and then non-binary people with uteruses. I think they do have. I think they should be the first people we go to when we're having this conversation. I think their lived experience trumps whatever abstract philosophizing, I, as someone without a uterus, can come up with. I think since it is a deeply personal issue. I said earlier, I thought a lot about it because it is sort of a philosophical issue with real world implications. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's really a personal issue. I guess you could say with philosophical implications. I mean, it does come down to the cost of those who can get pregnant. And I am more interested in what they have to say on the issue, or I think they should be listened to more than someone like myself. I mean, it is. Like, I guess everyone's affected by it in the sense that, like, we're all affected by, the laws that get passed and the values that our society upholds, and um, but at the end of the day, fundamentally, um, those who are able to get pregnant are the ones most affected by laws prohibiting or allowing abortion. Um, and we should take that into account. I know that bothers some people because, people who, um, rail against identity politics, and think it, like, muddies political issues. Um, but politics has, was, is, and will always be personal. Um, includes a large group, like it affects a large group of people, and to some degree, it is about um, compromise and working together. It is a communal. Um, Politics is a communal activity, but our laws and public policy, um, you know, affect us every day, and some laws affect certain people more than others. And so I think the only correct thing to do is, when an issue comes up, or when a certain legislation comes up, or debate about the legality of certain things comes up, we first have to ask, who does this most affect? And when we figure out who this most affects, you talk to that community, you talk to those people, you listen to their experience, listen to their thoughts, you give them, a platform, a voice, a way to, uh, you know, a way to engage and educate. Although it's not their responsibility to educate. Um, and only, after you've heard, only after you've done that can you, I think, move forward and make progress. And, you know, uh, put forward your first principles. Um, I guess that's about it for today. Um, it was a little slow going at the beginning, but I think I got the podcast rolling as it um, went on. Again, I do apologize for not being more prepared. I'll try to be more prepared in the future. But I did want to make a statement because even though I don't have a uterus, and this isn't something that will affect me personally, it is an important issue to me because I recognize, the people that it can affect personally, and I do want to ensure that, um, um, that I empathize with and fight for their civil rights, as best as I can. Now, this podcast isn't going to have change the world, have much of any influence, and I probably should try to actually involve myself in, you know, activism, if I really want to make much of a difference. Um, I tend to be a solitary person, or not solitary, but more of an, I'm an introverted kind of person, and not a fan of big crowds, and I don't get out much, but this podcast was my very small, it's the pebbles I wanted to add to the wall of debate and debate on the issue of abortion. I hope you found something valuable in it. But on that note, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And hopefully more content will be. Hopefully I'll put out more content out in the near future. So, with all that said, take care.